Well, this is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking the beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, that illusion is usually king. And in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's got to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views. And well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Dr. Dennis Cuddy, and we're going to be talking about the Illuminati. Now, what is the Illuminati? Does it exist today? What influence did the Illuminati have on the French Revolution? What influence does the Illuminati, or at least the ideas proposed by the man who developed the Illuminati, have on the unfolding of world events today? So hopefully we're going to have Dennis here very, very shortly, but you go back and understand the Illuminati was organized on May 1st. Why is May Day important? Because that's the day the Illuminati was founded. It was May 1st, 1776. So when you look on the back of the dollar bill, and you'll notice that in Roman numerals beneath the caption there, a pyramid capped by the all-seeing eye, the unfinished pyramid, there you see the reference to Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new secular order that is to be established, the new one world government. But above that, on the base of the pyramid, are the numbers in Roman numerals 1776. And so it's vitally important that people understand that this can refer to the Declaration of Independence, or it can refer to the Illuminati. The difficulty is the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do at all with an unfinished pyramid, the idea of an incomplete society that is going to be completed. The American Republic was founded, by Christians to have a place where men could be free to worship God as they saw fit, where men would have the power of government limited so that men would be able to practice their religion freely. On the other hand, the idea of the Illuminati was to destroy all religion, all governments, all social structure, all morality, and of course replace it with a new morality dictated by the ruling elite. Dr. Dennis Cuddy, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and pick up the story? Incidentally, the 5-letter series on the Illuminati is posted at News with Views. It's well worthwhile your reading after having heard Dr. Cuddy discuss it. You pick up the story.
Okay, but first what I'd like to do, since it's been a while since I've been on Radio Liberty, is I'd like to thank all the people who have helped, as I think you have mentioned when they've called in. My mom has been in the hospital and rehab and so forth, so it's been a difficult period, and we have to pay the bills and so forth. So I really appreciate the appeal that you sent out and all those who have helped. Having said that, well, there's so far a 5-part series so far that I've done on News with Views on the Illuminati. Part 6 should be up this coming Monday, and after that there's going to be at least a Part 7, and we'll see after that. But the Illuminati is called the Order by its members. It was a secret society founded on May 1, 1776 by Adam Wisehaupt. And there have been a number of books written about it, and according to University of Edinburgh professor, and he was General Secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, so he's not some flake, John Robinson. He wrote a book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, in 1798, saying the purpose of that organization was to root out all religion, ordinary morality, abolish national distinctions, demean patriotism, and, quote, rule the world, end quote. So in a nutshell, that's what they were about.
All right, fine. We're going to be back here in just a moment to develop these ideas. It's vitally important, ladies and gentlemen. You understand the purpose of the Illuminati was to bring about a world government.
Right.
The purpose of America's foreign and domestic policy today, contrary to what most people believe, is to bring about a world government. Well, this is Dr. Stan and our guest, Dr. Dennis Cuddy. We were simply talking about the strange death of Tim Russert after he had asked both George W. Bush and John Kerry on national television during the 2004 presidential campaign about the secret society they belong to. Now, do you want a president who belongs to a secret society, who's sworn secret oaths, and of course, whose loyalty is not to our country, but to the purposes and goals of this organization, which is Skull and Bones? And of course, when Tim Russert had the audacity to ask both of these presidential candidates, both members of Skull and Bones, during the 2004 presidential election about that secret society, both men say, well, a little taken aback, the secret society is so secret we can't tell you. Well, what's its purpose? What's its goal? I mean, you're going to be the president of the most powerful nation in the world, and you belong to a secret society, and you won't tell anybody about it? Oh, no, it's too secret. Well, I was just noticing that it wasn't long after that Tim Russert had a heart attack and died. He was a young man. Oh, sometimes young men do have heart attacks, but remember, ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with vicious organizations that think nothing at all about sacrificing millions of people in senseless wars as they pursue their goal towards a one-world government under the control of a ruling elite. But you pick up the story there, Dr. Cuddy.
Okay, since you had mentioned Tim Russert, yeah, he was one of the few individuals who would even bring this up periodically over the years. He would bring it up earlier when George W. Bush was running, and then his father before that. If any of you want to read a pretty good article, it's called Western Medicine Fails Tim Russert by Byron Richards, CNN. You can find it at www.healthtruthreveal.com with the capital first letters of health and truth and revealed. And I won't go into the whole thing, but it's fairly detailed about medically. And the fellow ends this. It was written in 2008. He says, the person writing this, thus after his plane flight, Russert was left in a significant pro-inflammatory and pro-clotting state. If he would have taken a few days off to rest and recover, he may well be alive today. But no, he dragged his jet-lagged body out of bed, put it on a treadmill for a while, inducing further wear and tear, considering circumstances, and then went off to work. He was never to return. And he goes into how it could have been easily prevented. It was totally unnecessary, his death. Okay, back to the Illuminati. Wisehaupt, his background, he had been a Jesuit and their Catholic order, and the Society of Jesus is the formal name, and a professor of canon law at the University at Ingolstadt, which is in Bavaria. And he initially called his secret society Perfectibilisten, those of perfection. According to co-authored Will and Ariel Durant, they wrote a book called Rousseau and Revolution in 1967. According to them, Wisehaupt, quote, followed the model of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, divided his associates into grades of initiation, and pledged them to obey their leaders in a campaign to, quote, unite all men capable of independent thought, close quote, and then make man, quote, a masterpiece of reason and thus attain highest perfection in the art of government, end quote. Wisehaupt himself said, quote, reason will be the only code of man. When at last reason becomes the religion of man, so will the problem be solved, end quote. So what he's doing is replacing religion, replacing faith, replacing the concept of God. Man will be his own God, and through his own reasoning abilities, they will create their own religion and their own perfect world, a utopia. They had these code names. Wisehaupt instead had a code name Spartacus, the ancient gladiator, and so on, back in 2,000 years ago, so Roman times and so on. To Wisehaupt, the problem with the world was all authority, not just the king or queen, monarchical authority, but religious as well. In addition, as well as ownership of private property. So you see right there, there's a number of things which are not going to go well with Americans and our own beliefs in private property and religious faith and biblical truth and God and so on. Wisehaupt believed that he had developed a plan that he said couldn't be stopped. It just can't be stopped, saying, quote, my means are effectual and irresistible. Our secret association works in a way that nothing can withstand, end quote. A key component of his plan included directing academic and religious education. If the Illuminati was to, as they said, govern the world, as they believed, they had to, quote, acquire the direction of education, of church management, of the professorial chair, and the pulpit, end quote. That's from Robinson's book I just mentioned, Proofs of Conspiracy. From the Illuminati, what was called their secret correspondence, Robinson found their, quote, instruction B. They had these instructions B for the whole degree of regent. That was a particular degree, the regent's degree. And that included winning, quote, the common people in every corner. This will be done chiefly by means of the schools, and by open, hearty behavior, show condescension, popularity, and toleration for their prejudices, which we, this is the Illuminati, shall at leisure root out and dispel, end quote. So it's a rather sneaky attitude. They would be open, hearty, and friendly and all this, but all the time they were going to root out and dispel the beliefs that dominated the society, whichever they moved into, French, American, whatever it was.
But of course they were going to get into the schools. They were going to put their people in the universities.
Right.
They were going to get their people into the religious seminaries so that they could condition the people as far as, the teachers and the ministers, so that the pulpits would not be talking about this sort of thing. We know back there, the late 1700s, Timothy Dwight, who is Jonathan Edwards' grandson, there's several other ministers, were actually talking out about the Illuminati. You never hear anybody talking about secret satanic societies, and this really is a satanic movement because its whole purpose is to destroy belief in God, to destroy all existing religions. And of course, this is the continuation of the concepts of the ancient mystery religions, was transformed into 1776 by Adam Wisehaupt, as he established a secret society that infiltrated many of the monarchies certainly of Europe at that time. And it even extended, as we will probably, I'm sure Dennis will tell you, it even extended in one form or another here in the United States in the latter part of the 1800s. But go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, in a bit we'll get to the Timothy Dwight sermons. It's very good. You can see how history shapes people, though, because about 3 or 4 generations later, another Timothy Dwight, the great-great-grandson, becomes head of Yale and becomes a member of Skull and Bones himself. So, I guess he didn't read his grandfather's work. But anyway, according to an author, Friedrich Christoph Schlosser, he wrote it's a long title, but it's History of the 18th Century and the Overthrow of the French Empire and so on. What he found, this was written in 1845, he said the Illuminati was particularly interested in princes, declaring that their, quote, grand object shall be to disseminate true knowledge among classes and to bring the ruling princes under guardianship of the order, end quote. So they would get into the universities, they would get into professorial positions, they would become tutors, especially to princes, who would later become kings and so on. They get them while they were young, shape them while they were very young. So there was a real strategy to this thing. It's a massive strategy. It's just a bunch of wackos, deciding to have some secret handshakes and a good time. One way the Illuminati did this was to place their members as tutors of the general noble class, the nobility. And, for example, Alexander I of Russia, he came under the tutorship of a member of the Illuminati at a very young age. There's also this secret correspondence that they had, the members of the Illuminati, where they also revealed their plan to use the liberation of women, women's lib, for their purposes. And they stated that in this way, quote, there is no way of influencing men so powerfully as by means of the women. These, the women, should therefore be our chief study. We should insinuate ourselves into their good opinion, give them hints of emancipation from the tyranny of public opinion and of standing up for themselves. It will be an immense relief to their enslaved minds, that's the women, to be freed from any one bond of restraint, and it will fire them more and cause them to work for us, the Illuminati, with zeal, without knowing that they do so for they will only be indulging their own desire of personal admiration, end quote. See how clever they are? These were the first women's lib people, buttering up women, promoting them, saying how great they were and so forth, so that through the flattery they would start to join the Illuminati and so on. So anyway, now concerning religious education particularly, there's a man, Terry Melanson is his name, and he has a very good online website called Illuminati Conspiracy Archive.
In fact, we've actually had several interviews with Terry, and may well be a tape of the month, so you'll get a chance to hear them. But go right ahead.
Okay, on this, his archive, he said, quote, Wisehaupt and his control turned Jesus into a socialist revolutionary, representing him, Jesus, as a secret society adept who came to preach egalitarian virtue, end quote. So, I mean, you can see each one of these, the women's lib and so forth, in the 60s. I mean, the same thing, the same forces are at work, doing exactly the same thing. In a letter dated September 19, 1776, this is, right from the get-go, Wisehaupt himself refers to, quote, our grand master, Jesus of Nazareth, end quote. Of course, it wasn't the Jesus of the Bible. It was Wisehaupt's creation of Jesus.
And of course, everything is to undermine Christianity. There is a conspiracy against Christianity. That's why they took God out of our schools. That's why they took prayer out of our schools and the Ten Commandments. And they know exactly what they're doing. And of course, that was done by the Masons. The Masons control the Supreme Court. Has anybody ever mentioned that? We have darkly admitted for you. You can read it in our book, Brotherhood of Darkness. Isn't it amazing? None of the ministers ever talk about how the Masons took God and prayer out of our schools. Well, our guest today, of course, Stan. Our guest, of course, is Dr. Dennis Cuddy. And Dr. Cuddy, you go right ahead with your discussion of the Illuminati.
Well, what you just mentioned, it prompted me to think that Carol Quigley initially thought the same thing. What Macmillan did was just a sort of accident, destroying that plate of half of his book. I think later on he became fairly suspicious, but initially he thought the same thing as Monica did. And then in terms of the CIA, they're everywhere. They're not only at CNN, but I think it was Craig Roberts, didn't he say? It's a mutual friend of ours. He has authored a number of books, and the last one he authored, he was trying to get it published, and the publisher, the editor he's working with, said, hey, it's a great book. You really ought to get this published. And Craig said, well, why don't you publish it? Oh, no, we can't do that. The CIA people here would never let that happen. So they're in the publishing houses all over the place. All right, back in terms of the Illuminati, if you're going to get into the seminaries, if you're going to get into the universities, if you're going to become tutors to princes, you're basically trying to change the values of people. If you're going to start the first sort of women's lib movement, what you have to do, according to their plan, and this is what Robinson did, the Proofs of a Conspiracy author, 1798, he said their plan included, quote, destroying the veneration of marriage vows, end quote. And he includes, Robinson, a letter from Illuminist Count. It's titled Ludwig Savioli. Now, his code name was Brutus. And in that letter, this Count Savioli stated, quote, the order must possess the power of life and death in consequence of our oath, by the same right that any government in the world possesses it. For the order comes in their place, making them unnecessary. So in other words, they're going to make the governments, national governments, unnecessary because the order, the Illuminati, will actually be in control. I mean, they may have some frontmen and all, but the order, the Illuminati, is going to be in control. That's the end of the quote. This power of life and death that he talks about obviously goes right to the beginning of abortion. And Robinson, in his book, wrote that in the handwriting of another Illuminist, Franz Zwack. He's actually, Zwack is Weishaupt's closest confidant, and his code name was Cato. So in the handwriting of Zwack was, quote, a description of a strong box which, if forced open, shall blow up and destroy its contents. That's one thing. There were several receipts for procuring abortion. A composition which blinds or kills when spurted in the face. See, they have these little assassination devices. A method for filling a bedchamber with pestilential vapors, end quote. So these guys, I mean, they were, very much like covert operation CIA guys, the original covert CIA guys with their methods and their secret boxes and their exploding powders and so forth, and pestilential vapors in the bedchamber. Specifically regarding abortion, Wisehaupt himself wrote to a confidant. This one's name was Jacob Hertel. His code name was Marius. He wrote to him in September of 1783 that Wisehaupt and his sister-in-law, Wisehaupt's sister-in-law, quote, have tried every method in our power to destroy the child, quote, in the womb. So there he is, Wisehaupt, and this is going to be a big scandal if it gets out, are trying to abort the child in the womb. So abortion is part of this life and death sort of decision. After all, if you're your own God, you can do that sort of thing. Not only did the members of the Illuminati have code names, but they also use symbols as well. And Dr. Stan has referred many times to the Librarian of Congress and Rhodes Scholar. James Billington had this book, Fire in the Minds of Men, 1980. And in that book, Billington says, quote, Wisehaupt described his recruitment of Illuminists from within Masonic lodges in Munich as, quote, the progress of the, and what it has in Billington's book is a circle with a dot in the middle of it. There's a picture there, a point in the middle of a circle, in the political area. So later on, what you'll find is this dot within the circle will pop up, and Alice, Bailey, and Blavatsky, and all this, the point of light within the, so forth. Anyway, they have various symbols and so on. But anyway, what you have here is symbols as well as code names in which they would communicate. And also, if you look at the Masonic website, now this is a Masonic website, you can see the owl as an Illuminati symbol for their Minerval degree. Before I mentioned the Regent's degree, they had that Minerval degree, which was just above the class of novice. So you have novice, Minerval, Regent. And when the break ends, we'll go into where that comes from. It's from Greek mythology. You have Minerva, or Athena. She was the goddess of wisdom and reason. And the Illuminati censal in the Minerval assembly at night bows in front of this pyramid painted there. At this point, you might remember this owl, this gigantic carved owl at the Bohemian Grove, where many of the elite are.
And here up in Santa Rosa, they have a 40-foot owl. And you'll find all the presidents are there. All the secretaries of state are there. The Henry Kissingers, the Rockefellers, all of the leaders of our country. If you've never seen Alex Jones' DVD on the Bohemian Grove, he snuck in, he got videos. And these people, of course, with their black robes and their candles and their hoods and their chants and the feigned human sacrifice. We'll be right back. My guest is Dr. Dennis Cuddy, and we're talking about his articles. You'll find them at newswithviews.com, and there's 5 articles there on the Illuminati. Why is the Illuminati important today? Because the ideas put forward by the Illuminati are coming to pass. Basically, what they wanted to do was do away with marriage, and today in America, 1 in every 2 marriages ends in divorce. They wanted to push women's liberation. They wanted, of course, to push abortion. They wanted, of course, to undermine the religion. And, of course, today in America, the message of the church, and many of them, is changing. The music of the church has certainly changed, and it does not honor God, the rock music. You want to have rock music, that's fine, but in a church? But, of course, they have infiltrated the seminaries where our ministers and our priests go to learn. They've infiltrated the universities. And certainly if you are a conservative and you try to get the truth out in the universities, why, you'll be blacklisted. That happened to Dr. Cuddy. That happened to Stephen Mosier. That happened to our friend Dr. Anthony Sutton. He was never allowed to get his doctorate because, of course, he told the truth. And if you actually are in the academic field today, you don't dare tell the truth, you go along. We don't have free academic freedom. We have academic tyranny in America, and Dr. Cuddy will certainly attest to that fact. But let's get back, of course, to Dr. Cuddy and his description of the Illuminati and why it's important today. Go right ahead, Dennis.
Okay. Since you mentioned Manly P. Hall, he is one who also said in the Lost Keys of Freemasonry that, quote, the seething energies of Lucifer are in the Mason's hands. And in my article, the first part, Illuminati Part 1, what I mentioned before the break was I put a Masonic website. And on the Masonic website, it has an original Illuminati symbol. And you'll see the writing is in German, but the picture is clear. It has this owl. And the owl is very, very important, especially for their Minerval degree, just above the class of novice. And that came from Greek mythology, where you had Minerva, Pallas Athena. Was the goddess of wisdom and reason. Remember, reason, man's reason will solve our problems, not faith in God. And just as an aside, in my 1991 book, Now's the Dawning of the New Age, New World Order, around page 20 or so, I put a picture of Pallas Athena where she's got this spear, and at her foot is this snake, and she's supposed to be, hammering down this snake, which is against reason and wisdom and enlightenment and light, as in Lucifer, the light bearer. You're supposed to pursue, wisdom and enlightenment, the days of the Enlightenment before the Illuminati. Illuminati means enlightened ones, all that sort of stuff. And that's as opposed to belief in God and faith in God and following a biblical type of morality, sort of a do-your-own thing, again, from the 60s. And so what you find transported up to today is that Bohemian Grove, there's this huge owl. And actually, when Bohemian Grove began, as I recall, it was back in the late 1800s, one of the initial people back there was Ambrose Bierce, who was himself a Satanist. So, this makes perfect sense that they have that owl there coming from Ambrose. Okay, so Robinson, the author of Proofs of a Conspiracy, 1798, related that, because he had these documents, once one became an Illuminatus minor, there's Illuminatus minor, and then you become a big shot Illuminatus major. Once you become a Illuminatus minor, quote, the pupil, these are the young people, the pupil is warmed by the pictures of universal happiness and convinced that it is a possible thing to unite all of the inhabitants of the earth in one great society. Remember that term, great society. Continue to quote, then it may frequently be no hard task to make him, this is the minor, think that patriotism is a narrow-minded, monopolizing sentiment, end quote. You see that? See how clever they are? In a strategy that Fabian socialists later would adopt, the Illuminatus minor also is told, quote, we must do our utmost to procure our advancement of Illuminati to all civil offices. So they want to get their people in government, civil service jobs, insinuate them in there. Fabian socialist H.G. Wells, in a book he had, 1907, New Worlds for Old, he revealed, this is the way he put it, quote, socialism ceased to be an open revolution and became a plot. Functions were to be shifted quietly, unostentatiously, from the representative, your representatives in government, to the official he appointed.
And I think
bureaucracy was to slip into power, end quote.
I think it's so important for people to realize that socialism is a sincere, benevolent, idealistic theory. It's a wonderful theory. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all live happily and be provided for and ready to... We would not have to worry about our health or certainly our shelter or our food. It would all be provided for us. And suddenly everybody would work, and those who couldn't work wouldn't have to work. But of course, the whole idea is a theory because it doesn't work without somebody in charge. And that is why this people of great wealth in America push socialism. And people say, well, why would people of great wealth push socialism? It wants to take away their money. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a taxing system, and they tell you that the wealth are paying all the wealthy are paying all the taxes. The wealthy know how to get around paying taxes. I mean, the major brunt of the taxation is on the middle class, but the wealthy are pushing socialism because they're going to be the rulers. After all, we put all power in Washington, D.C., and we have congressmen who don't believe in the Constitution and senators who don't believe in the Constitution, and they pass all sorts of special breaks for the people of great wealth. In fact, we have these new laws to regulate the banks. What do? They give the banks ever more power. In fact, this gentleman who Barack Obama has just appointed to be, his new chief advisor just happens to have come from Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, sure, they're the ones that put up the most money for his election, but they do the same thing for the Republicans. You have to understand it's all a fraud. Socialism is a fair, benevolent, idealistic theory, but it doesn't work unless somebody's in charge, and that's why these people, we call them the elite Brotherhood of Darkness, call them what you will. The military-industrial complex, the Iron Triangle, Ronald Reagan talked about that. The Eastern establishment, that's why they push socialism. They just don't want the common people to know that. They certainly don't want the people in the university professors who are pushing socialism because they want to get back at the people of great wealth, realize that they're carrying out the programs advocated by this Brotherhood of Darkness. Go right ahead, Dennis.
Okay, and so after I go into that particular aspect of it, how they're very sneaky and want to have patriotism viewed as a narrow-minded, monopolizing sentiment, so they can have this transfer of allegiance to them and this world government they want. The last thing I mentioned is another official. Before I mentioned the count, now this was Baron Adolf von Nigge. K-N-I-G-G-E. His name, code name in Illuminati, was Philo, and he was actually Wisehaupt second in command for a period of about 5 years, from 1780 to 1784. According to Robinson, his book, the Baron's favorite scheme, as he called it, was to create, quote, citizens of the world, end quote. Now, you might reflect at this point whether you've heard any leading political figures recently refer to themselves as citizens of the world. So whether it's world citizenship, abortion, women's lib, or some other issue, covert CIA secrets, exploding devices, whatever it is, you can probably trace its origin right back to the Illuminati plan. So the Illuminati is far from dead. And the way I begin part two is by picking up on part one. And I mentioned this acceptance of world citizenship was an important part of that. And relevant to that, shortly after Ernst von Guckhausen was dismissed, not everybody continued, some of them wised up. So this fellow was dismissed from the Illuminati. He wrote a novel. Now, the reason he did that, was to say, it's sort of like on the TV screen where none of these characters are real. So he writes this novel titled Exposure of the Cosmopolitan System, in letters from ex-Freemasons, and that was 1786. He writes this book. And in there, the hero asks his superior in this novel, quote, what purpose do the Illuminati have in infiltrating and dominating Masonry, question mark? And the response, of course, in the book is, quote, to emancipate all of mankind from religious and political slavery, end quote. And so the superior, the one asked, the question continues, quote, when nations are no longer separated from one another, when citizens are no longer influenced by the exclusive interest of any state, or the parochial sentiment of patriotism, world citizenship. What does it mean? You are either a citizen or you are a rebel. There is no third choice, end quote. And so that's where we are today. There's this movement, this creation following the Illuminati plan that will make people, including our president and others, world citizens. And if you don't go along, you are a rebel. And you know what happens to rebels.
And, of course, ladies and gentlemen, why do we have troops in 130 nations? Why? Because we're occupying those nations, ladies and gentlemen. We have our troops in Germany 65 years after the war ended. We have our troops certainly in Japan 65 years after the war ended. Why? Why? Because they're the two of the largest economies in the world, and we control those governments. That's why our troops are there. We have 720 foreign bases, but we can't let the American people know. The American people don't want an empire. They want to live and be able to live and let live. But what our leaders really want, and this is the people behind the scenes, the Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones, CFR, trilateralists, call them what you will. They all work together. They all interlock. I mean, the CIA is simply an extension of Skull and Bones. And basically what they want is a world government under a ruling elite. They only have to get a few more countries. We put people in power who we want in power. We rig elections there just like they rig elections here in the United States. I mean, Al Gore won the 2000 election. And certainly John Kerry won the 2004 election, but they wanted George W. Bush there, and so they simply rigged the elections. The exit polls in Ohio showed that John Kerry won the state. But you know what? John Kerry had plenty of money. He could have challenged the result. He didn't. Any more than after John Kennedy, stole the election from Richard Nixon in 1960. Why Richard Nixon was told, do not challenge it. We want the American people to think that, elections are all legitimate. You'll get to be president later, Richard. Just be a good little boy. Move to Washington, D.C., go to work for a Rockefeller, the law firm. Take the apartment right next to Nelson Rockefeller there, and of course, you'll do very well. We'll give you the next 6 years to run for the presidency, but do not challenge the corrupt election in 1960 that was stolen. This is what they do all throughout the world. But go right ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, and a lot of people viewed Nixon as a real conservative, and he sort of presented some of that image, but he even surprised Rhodes Scholar reporter Howard K. Smith by saying he was a Keynesian in economics, which is, Keynes is the leading socialist, Fabian socialist theorist there was in the early part of the 20th century, and just briefly back to my secret Nazi plan, you have to remember that I think the fellow's name was Metaxas, was one of these Nazis who came over and just happened to settle around Whittier, California, and then decided to put up a couple of $1 million for this young person named Richard Nixon to run for Congress in the first place. So Nixon, right from the get-go, even in the late 40s, was supporting the Atlantic Union, which basically was a federal uniting of Europe and the U.S. I mean, right there is our federal republic. Our Constitution is gone. When you've united with Europe, that's it. We're no longer independent free. But anyway, okay. So concerning the strategies of the Illuminati, they're very, very similar to those of the power elite, as I call them today. For example, they adopted the Machiavellian concept that the quote, "the ends justifies the means." That was theirs. They followed up Machiavelli with that. Which is contrary, of course, to the biblical admonition that one should not do evil, that good may come from it. Theirs was the ends justifies the means, the exact opposite. Now, today, you can see some of the power elite's activities regarding, for example, population control as exhibiting that, the ends justifies means. The plot of the Illuminati, after it was formed in 1776, after a few years, began to be exposed by what's called the Bavarian Court of Inquiry. And they commenced their investigation in 1783 and concluded with the abolishment, as Dr. Stan mentioned, in 1786. But that's just the formal we abolish you. There had already been, at that time, friction within Wisehaupt's own rank. That Baron I mentioned earlier, von Nig, codenamed Philo, he was initiated in the Illuminati in July of 1780. And as I said, he was Wisehaupt's second in command. Well, he resigned in April 20th of 1784 because of Wisehaupt's direction and dictatorial management of the order. Even he got tired of Wisehaupt's being a dictator. And that was revealed in something called Supplement of Further Original Works, published the next year, 1787, regarding the Illuminati. And the very next year, 1788, the Baron wrote, quote, "As a rule, under the veil of secrecy, dangerous plans and harmful teachings can be accepted just as well as noble intentions and profound knowledge, because not all members themselves are informed of such depraved intentions, which sometimes tend to lie hidden beneath the beautiful facade." So even this guy, this number two, is sort of slowly finding out what Wisehaupt's really up to. In the same year, 1787, the supplement Further Original Works was published. There was something else called Original Writing of the Illuminati. Now, that was published in Munich by Johann Strobel, and his code name was Ediles, Ediles. And this is another guy. He was dismissed by the order in 1783, and he became an ardent opponent of the group. So it's not everybody was, loving the thing. After they got into it, after they found what was wrong, after they found that Weishaupt had this really, really secret thing going, some of them dropped out. And even though they were abolished by 1786, Weishaupt, remember, he already had a plan for its continuation. So he had prepared for this eventuality. There's another person in addition to John Robinson who wrote at this time, Augustin Barruel. He wrote 1798, same year as Robinson, something called Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism. the Jacobins in France, French Revolution, all that. And in there, that book, Wisehaupt is quoted as stating, quote, "I have foreseen everything, and I have prepared everything. Let my whole order go to rack and ruin. In 3 years I will answer to restore it, and that to a more powerful state than it is in at present. I shall rise stronger than ever. I can sacrifice whole provinces. The desertion of a few individuals, therefore, will not alarm me," end quote. So this guy had his act together. He had a plan for this eventual eradication. When it occurred, he wasn't going away. He had a plan to follow up afterwards.
And of course, the organization was disbanded in 1786. 3 years later, in 1789, came the French Revolution, and the Illuminati plays a very important part in that. And the Masonic lodges, the Jacobins, it was all the result of a conspiracy to overthrow the existing social order. The government, the church, and of course, that is a continuing revolution. It didn't end with the French Revolution. It's still going on today, ladies and gentlemen. It's still going on today. Well, Dennis, you got 3 minutes to...
Where are my car keys?